We will now continue with our last panel discussion headed by Mr. René Nyberg to the right. He is the former ambassador of Finland in Moscow. He now heads the East Office of Finnish Industries. From right to left Galina Mikhaleva, Secretary of YABLOKO Political Committee. Mr. Henrik, member of the European Parliament and a very active debater when it comes to Russia. Former member, yeah. Mr. Matti Anttonen, former ambassador of Finland in Russia and nowadays Director General for the Department for External Economic Relations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Mr. Olle Schmidt, member of the European Parliament. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna-Lena. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This will be the last panel. I hope you still are with us. The heading of the panel is Trade and Economic Relations, what further integration is desirable. I don't like the heading. I would say, how can we achieve more trade? Because don't make a mistake. We all trade, we all want to trade, and a lot of us make a bundle by trading with Russia. I would say that trading more, investing more is actually the same thing that people were talking about when they were advocating a more liberal visa regime. Trade is a very powerful tool. But trading and investing we will do by adhering to, in the case of Finland, to Finnish laws and Russian laws. So don't make any mistake here. I will now ask our first speaker, and Olle Schmidt, to take the floor and introduce his views, and then we'll kick it off. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Olle Schmidt. I'm a liberal from Sweden, so I'm not a German. Make no mistake. Even though my forefather, he was from Germany, actually. Grandforefather. I'm privileged to be here. This is the second time here. As you know, the Swedish relations historical with Finland is very specific. And that is perhaps essential to know. And perhaps my comments are also related to this, even though that, of course, it is the EU that is in main focus. After 18 years of negotiations, EU has achieved its long-term objective of seeing Russia enter the WTO. Be sure of that. Russia is, as we have heard, the furthest biggest trading partner of the EU, and the EU is the first trading partner of Russia. And of course, that is, as the moderator said, that is business. And as Christina said in a more blunt way, money talks. And our question here is perhaps to say, is money always supposed to talk? Do we have some moral obligations? And should that be combined with what we are doing with also concerning trade? And I do think that that was actually what the panelists before us was hinting and suggesting. I am a member of the ACP-EU Joint Assembly, so I'm normally in Africa, or the Pacific, or the Caribbean, 78 poorest countries in the world, and there we have the so-called Cotonou Agreement, now being replaced by the EPAs, Economic Partnership Agreements with the European Union. And one of the core issues there is that if you want to trade with Europe, then you should have a basic rule of law. And if you're not having that, you will not be a trading partner in that sense. So realpolitik is also a bit of moral. After the Russian-Ukrainian disputes in 2006 and 2009, many European countries diversify their supply. Also, the European Commission is pushing for the implementation of the third energy package. I suppose that my dear friend Henrik will mention that. And that is designed to liberalize Europe's energy sector. Russia's state-owned giant Gazprom is known for its monopolistic practices, and the European Commission is, as I quote, fed up with the culture of corruption and lack of transparency and competition. And I think this is a welcome call for change. I must admit I was always opposing to this pipeline. Am I forgiven? I don't know. The negative effects of corruption in the energy sector should not be underestimated, as been said here today. Inflated energy processes mean that industry suffers higher prices and reduced competitiveness. What is this? That is not mine. No, it's not mine. It's yours? Yeah. Okay. I haven't been sneaking. A culture of corruption has a weakening effect on democracy and rule of law. And the question again, has this anything to do with trade and our relationships? I was a bit late, but I heard the discussion this morning. And for me, a buzzword and a key word is reciprocity. Reciprocity. And of course you could say, as I heard the minister in this country said, perhaps you should, and there was a friend up here, I don't know if you're still there, you shouldn't be preaching. No, I can agree on this. Some of us, we are preaching, and that could be tiresome. But EU is about soft power. And soft power is about legislation and some preachments, actually. We may disagree. I agree that we may disagree. And I'm open for the discussion here. But I do think, as we are doing in the European Union concerning new member states, and it's very difficult to change those that actually are member states. We know that. Hungary was mentioned here and so on. But when they are becoming members, we have some conditionality. And my question, shouldn't we have that concerning trade as well? We heard our nice German friend here, and I think he raised important issues. But I think we need to further develop this. And I don't think, and I listened to those panelists coming from the inside of Russia, what are the best way of supporting you? Is this the way to open, to embrace everything in Russia? Or is it, on the contrary, try to stick to some conditions? I don't think that the answer is always there. It's not a definite one. But I do think at least some of us should raise the issue. And the rule of law and the decency of a society, I think it matters. It matters. And you could say that liberalism is to reconnect and connect to every individual citizen. That is for sure right. An economical environment is enormously important. That is also, of course, very right and correct. But don't you think that we have a responsibility actually to link those goals together and combine them? I think so. If Russia cannot live up to its promised reforms, both for domestic democracy and trade liberalization, the EU will take action. A wider institutionalization of trust from the EU requires Putin and the government to show some willingness to reform. And question again, do we see that? When Putin recently visited Germany and the Netherlands, the country's biggest trade partners in Europe, as has been said, it is clear that Russia's stance on human rights have left the countries with no real allies in Europe. Finland and the Baltic states have for years seen Russian military practice on their backyard. And I must admit, we have seen it in Sweden also, and it has been devastating. The other week, this happened in my own country. The Russians' attitude towards its neighbors is, from my point of view, most worrying. I might be wrong, but that's what I think. Deeper integration between the two economies is most welcomed, of course, but we must not rush into things. Russia has a lot of work to do on a range of topics, especially regarding democracy, human rights and corruption. I'm a member of the special committee in the European Parliament concerning organized crime and corruption. And it was strange to see that twice the Russian president has been put on a list here in Finland that he is a part of the organized crime. And both of those times the Finnish police here said it's wrong. It has been some wrong in the statistic. I don't know, but perhaps someone can explain how he ended up there. We liberals in the European Parliament do not... They're still studying. Okay. Well, that's not for me to answer. We liberals in the European Parliament do not accept to ease visa requirements for Russian state officials. And Christina has said that, and I agree with her totally. But on the other hand, speeding up the visa application, as was said previously, for normal citizens, if so-called, and NGOs, I think that's vital. Of course, that we share views and so on, that is absolutely something we ought to do. But again, this is not easy. We need a balanced approach. And we have the same discussion concerning the other neighborhood countries. EU-Russian relations has undergone substantial change since the collapse of the Soviet Union. In my opinion, you can say that these are relations between two new and constantly changing political actors. Just like the EU, Russia has become a major actor in world politics, and stable relations are therefore, of course, essential. I agree with the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Catherine Ashton, when she described EU-Russian relations as constructive yet critical. There are foreign policy differences between the Federation and the Union, and the EU should continue to urge Russia to join the international consensus. But I would like to relate to the issue concerning Syria. What is happening? Here we have 2 years of outbreak, lawless in Syria, nearly 75,000 people murdered, killed in a sort of genocide. It took 10 years in Iraq, no comparison whatever, and there they killed 110,000 people. 2 years, and Russia is blocking everything. Is this good for trade? My answer is no. Crackdown on civil society cannot be tolerated from a trading partner, and European patience has limits. President Putin should take note that any anti-democracy policies will affect on the relations with Europe. The European Parliament has in several resolutions, as was mentioned, highlighted this. But I don't know if they are listening. Are they listening in Moscow? We don't know that. Perhaps they are listening now. You never know. Perfect implementation of human rights is hard for all countries. That has been said here. And perhaps we should do our own business in Europe before lecturing, before preaching. I can agree on this. But that could not actually make it difficult for us to say what we believe in, because then I think we would fail to our obligation as human beings, and also by supporting those citizens that are living in Russia, where we need actually good relation. It's clear, let me conclude here, Mr. Moderator. It is clear that great Russia is moving, but no policy advisor can for sure say which path it will choose. The European Union hopes it will be towards trade liberalization, question mark, political predictability, question mark, and sensitivity for the public opinion in Russia. For me, there is nothing else than old customs speaking against this. And I do believe, and I hope, that this discussion can actually end in a more public and open debate, transparent debate. And I will conclude by saying, when I have made my view clear in the European Parliament, after listening to Christina and others, and Henrik, and Astrid, and whatever, Nils Torvalds, they are all brilliant politicians from Finland, in our liberal group anyway. I've always said that in the end, it has to be a reciprocity. If Russia and Putin is coming to Europe and say, we want this, this, we want open business, we want trade, we want to sell this and this, then we are supposed to do the same coming to Moscow. This is for me, it's not negotiable to treat NGOs, human rights, and the freedom of press, the freedom of expression, as it is today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olle, for your introduction. The heading of our discussion is economy and trade. We can discuss visas. We could discuss pipelines. Pipelines would be very much in the field of our heading. And we already had an extensive and a very valuable discussion on the situation of the NGOs in Russia, human rights, the importance of human rights. So let's stick to the topic. Before I give the floor to Matti Anttonen, who was one of my successors in Moscow, and who's one of the best Russia experts Finland has, I'll make 3 observations. One of the more interesting things that Yavlinsky said this morning was that there are no property rights in Russia. All the property rights are always conditioned. The second thing he made was that he described Russia as a gigantic corporation. My second observation is that if you watched Putin's last call-in, which lasted almost 5 hours, I was struck by the fact that the former Minister of Finance, Alexei Kudrin, was given such a prominent role, and he was actually questioning the policy of the present Russian government in an exchange with Putin, which was most cordial and in a way supportive. Kudrin probably left the hall, as did Russian the TV audience, with the understanding that he still has Putin's backing. What he said was he doesn't want to take, I'll quote him, "I'm not ready to be in charge of other inertial processes and micromanage по-русски ручное управление of the economy. I want to do real work." So we have to keep watching what's going to happen with the present Russian government. My third point would be energy, but maybe Henrik will touch that. It is very important to note that Russia is, after all protests, going along with the EU's third energy package. This is an example of the real power of the European Union, the power of making rules and setting and making rules and regulations which actually have a worldwide significance. With these words, Matti, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very nice to address a liberal gathering in Finland. That's not very common. Let's start with a bit of a history, then I'll go to the modern time. But I think it's very important to understand how short the history of Russia-EU relations is. It was only in the late 80s these major entities of the European continent signed their first agreement during the Gorbachev time. And very soon after the Soviet Union collapsed and the work started from the scratch again. 2 days before Finland signed its EU accession treaty in Corfu, Russia and EU signed the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. So about 20 years ago. Even that agreement included a possibility of a free trade agreement with European Union, between the European Union and Russia. And it many ways reflected the present, at that stage, situation in Europe. The European Union was negotiating free trade agreements with all its eastern partners, and at the same time, this same idea of a free trade agreement was included in the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. It was also a very good time in other ways for Russian foreign policy. Russia started its integration in the WTO in summer '95. Around at the same time, Russia joined the Council of Europe. At the same time, Russian economy was not doing very well, and I think that had its impact on how fast these processes started to work. Russia didn't have the bureaucratic expertise for these WTO talks. First years were more or less wasted. Only after 2000 the work started in earnest. At the same time, for Russia, the integration framework very much was CIS. It was the way to take care of the problems created by the dissolution of the Soviet Union. EU-Russia relations took a new turn around the turn of the century. First, the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement entered into force, and then we created the so-called four common spaces. And also, as I said earlier, the WTO accession talks started in earnest. The WTO accession talks started in earnest. But around at the same time, Russia started its own integration process in the former Soviet Union, which led then, later last decade, the formation of the customs union. I think in many ways the customs union is foremost a political process, because those two countries, Belarus and Kazakhstan, are only about 10% of Russian foreign trade. If you add to these Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, is only few percentage points more, and I don't think the normal Russian on the streets would really favor having these countries in, especially if that would mean there would be a common labor market with these countries. It's a very controversial question in Russia to have Tajiks and Kyrgyz, in the same labor market with the Russians. At the same time, Russia would like to see Ukraine in this customs union. At the moment, that doesn't seem to be the case, as in Ukraine there is no willingness to enter into that union. Also, this customs union has very serious repercussions for Russian integration in the European space, because when two of the members of this customs union, i.e. Belarus and Kazakhstan, are not members of the WTO, it's technically very, very difficult for this customs union to come closer to European Union. And I think politically it's more or less impossible for the European Union to envisage a free trade area with the customs union where Belarus plays an important role. So I think this idea of a free trade area between European Union and Russia, I think that's off the table for some considerable time. But this does not mean that Russia and European Union are not close each other economically. Our share of Russian foreign trade is about 50%, and I think the figures will remain that. The European Union is especially important for Russia as a market for Russian oil and gas, and especially important for Russian gas exports and Russian gas export monopoly, Gazprom, because the only pipelines, export pipelines, except are to European Union, the only exception being to Turkey, and its share is rather small compared to the European Union. As we have been hearing, the European Union energy markets are being developed. Especially important is to increase competition in order to lower the prices. And here comes so-called unbundling, production and transport of electricity and gas. It has been very difficult for the European companies to do this. We know it from Finland, how it was. And also the companies coming outside the European Union have to play according to these rules. And here comes into picture the question of Gazprom, and as was mentioned here, the Commission is looking at these questions. I think EU and Russia will be more or less at this same situation in 2-3 years' time. The negotiations for the new agreement, which were started 2008, are not proceeding, as Russia does not seem fit to come closer economically to the European Union, as it wants to see what kind of effects WTO accession, which took place last summer, will have on Russian economy. Personally, I think Russia will fare quite well. I don't think the repercussions of WTO accession will be very serious for Russia. I think they will be mostly positive, but there is a rather lot of hesitation about this thing in Russia, a lot of discussion that it will be bad for Russian agriculture or other sectors. So I think this will have an effect on breaking or delaying the EU-Russia discussions as well. Just a few words about Russia-Finland economic relations. You're here in Helsinki and might be interesting and useful to hear a few words how we are faring with our eastern neighbor. Traditionally, Russia has been an important trading partner for Finland. During the Soviet time, after the Second World War, the Soviet Union's share of our foreign trade was something like 15, at most a bit more than 20%. So it was not dominating our economy as many people think. We wanted to sell our products to those markets who wanted to buy them, and the most important market in the past and at the present was Western Europe. But it does not mean that Russia was not important in certain sectors, especially for metalworking. During those post-war years, Finland delivered more than 2,000 ships for the Soviet Union. So, for example, that sector, Soviet Union, was very important. At the moment, the trade is growing. Russia is number 2 as our trading partner, as our importing partner number 1, because we are importing most of our oil, gas and coal from Russia. Have been doing that for a long time, having had no problems with that. I think something which is really important for both parties is the increasing tourism. Finland gave last year 1.4 million visas to Russians. It's 1/4 of all Schengen visas issued in Russia. So 5 million population Finland gives 1/4 of the visas of the whole European Union. I think this builds bridges between our societies. I think it's good for ordinary Russians and for the Russian society as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matti. Matti, that was excellent. Matti, I have to say that what you said about WTO and its effect on the EU-Russia negotiating process is important. But whatever we say about WTO, the decision by Putin, who else, to join WTO was a political decision. It was not a decision made on economic calculations. You have any number of arguments against WTO in the Russian debate. You have the oligarchs and the old kolkhozy and savkhozy, whatever. Everybody was against. It is a political decision to join the world instead of joining the losers. This is WTO. The second thing about, I like Matti's last remark very much about the visa liberalization. I mean, we can talk about visas and we can wish for whatever we want on visas. But the fact is that Finland has shown the way. By liberalizing our visa regime, we have shown that you can do it. Actually, you still need visas. But if you don't have problems, I mean, the most important reason for refusing visas today for Russian citizens are parking tickets. I mean, if you sin, if you don't pay your parking ticket, you will not be eligible to come back to Finland. So if you have to behave yourself, you have to have a passport, and you can travel. So, I mean, I'm trying to depoliticize the issue. I'm trying to show that you can handle these visa issues without the ideological component. We can hate or love it, but that's the way it's done in Finland. Thank you. Well, Henrik is our next speaker, and I'm sure Henrik will say a word about energy. Or well, Henrik is free to say whatever he wants, but as a former candidate, presidential candidate, and a former member of the European Parliament, he's been to seminars before.
Thank you, René. Yes, you have absolutely provoked me to say something about energy. I beg your pardon, I will start from a somewhat distant point, but I will arrive really at business environment and foreign relations and EU. So, distinguished audience, I'm very happy that Grigory Yavlinsky said that the big question is really to find the alternative. What after Putin? And I'm also happy that Kristina Ojuland said that we've got to help the Russians to get back their constitutional rights. I didn't know about that beforehand, but my point goes very closely to this. I have given the heading to my short presentation, Impact of Institutional Instability in Russia. That means unclear succession of power. Mr. Lux, you must know that there is a deep mistrust going throughout the Russian society. Was the answer some years ago I got from a very distinguished liberal Russian economist. When I had expressed my concern about the lack of trust and confidence in the relations between the EU and Russia. If I hadn't had that grey hair, he would have said young man. But now he said Mr. Lux. And then he added, 90% of the Russians do not trust the police, to be sure that I had understood what he said. The other day, I was listening to an oral defense of a doctor's thesis, and in her Lectio Precursoria, the respondent said that the primary resources of a community are trust and respect. Without them, the community would not function. And this brings me straight into the root of what I call the institutional instability in Russia. Something which would deserve much more attention it has got so far, but maybe we can put the focus on it during this seminar. And this is the unclear succession of the highest political power. Today, there are no institutional rules ensuring a self-evident decision when a successor to the president has to be found. We saw it recently, we have seen it before, and that's actually what the internal political fight or game goes for now within Russia. This drives the different stakeholders within the political and business elite into an ever-going struggle for power and money. And this is consuming very vital energy from being employed to enhance real national interests. At the same time, and we have heard ample of examples of that today, the business environment is suffering from hazardous changes and unpredictability. But it's also evident that these tensions have an impact on the foreign relations of Russia. Just a couple of months ago, Dmitry Trenin, who is the director of the Moscow Carnegie Center, had an article in Foreign Policy, and I only quote where he says that the invasion of US-Russian diplomacy by Russian domestic politics makes both the substance and the structure of bilateral relations unrecognizable. And I think it would be naive to believe that not also the relations with the EU have become contingent on a Russian interclan fight, to put it in dramatical terms. And indeed, it was already when I was in the parliament, but it hasn't been easy really to understand what Russia is aiming at, is expecting and going for in its relations with the European Union. And this brings us to the EU-Russia summit last December. Actually, we have heard elements from that already. I think it marks really a low tide mark in the political relations between the two. And we heard Matti Anttonen said that the negotiations on a new partnership and cooperation agreement were started in 2008. And the key issues, I would say, and particularly with regard to the heading of this panel, the key issues are really to open up for free trade, a common economic area, and common rules for the energy market. And here I shall respond to our dear chair. And also a comment with regard to what Olle Schmidt said. Nord Stream, to my mind, the real problem with Nord Stream has not so much with environment or other things to do. The real problem is that there are no common rules for the energy market between the EU and Russia. Never mentioned, never said, but that's the real root of it. And of course, as the European Union doesn't have any coherent foreign policy or policy for Russia, the golden opportunity was missed when this, in principle, okay arrangement, I mean, if someone wants to pay for it, the European Union should have simply said that, yes, it's good it's being built, but Russia should first ratify the European Energy Agreement. And this was the real missed golden opportunity. It shows actually a disastrous aspect of the relations on behalf of the European Union. But then one more word on this energy side. We all know that the global energy market is in a very turbulent phase of development, and this, together with the third energy package, which was referred to here, will, to my mind, it will oblige Russia and the European Union, and particularly Russia and Germany, to find common rules to handle this. On the Russian side, it will be extremely difficult because Gazprom will not be able to carry on its business in the good old way it has been doing so far. It's going to rethink, reassess its business concept completely. That will not be easy. But my belief is really that the interdependence here will oblige the two to find each other's, and that after that maybe we can go on with the partnership agreement. But there are, as we have heard, other obstacles here too. Well, last January at the Gaidar conference in Moscow, I would say that, well, it was a bit of the same as Matti Anttonen said. They're a distinguished group of economists. They deplored that they couldn't see the vitalizing economic nor political reforms they have been actually pleading for years and years. And those of you who have access to the Moscow Times may have read Anders Åslund's report from this. And he was really shaken by this conference. And he to pick out three small elements there, he said that he feared that the vulnerability of the economy, which is highly dependent on fluctuations in oil prices, and Russia's dependence on one single person and the extraordinary top-level corruption really will shake the country. He used even harder words, and it was actually more or less what Grigory Yavlinsky said when he said, was it his third threat internal was a collapse of the system. Well, somebody referred here to European banks withdrawing from Russia and its negative effect on foreign companies, particularly, of course, small and medium-sized companies will have difficulties in not being able to deal with their own banks, so to say. And I think also significant for the situation is that the resigning head of the central bank, not long ago, he was deploring that money is going to China, to India, to Brazil, to other countries, and going out from Russia. So this about the business environment. And I think, yes, it was just a few days ago, I think an interesting observation in Helsingin Sanomat, the biggest daily in this country. Kari Huhta had found a report by the American intelligence services. It was a forecast on different countries' internationals' influence, or a prediction of it for some decades. And for Russia, the influence was predicted to stay very low. And his conclusion was that a declining international position and reckless need of getting attention is a very hazardous combination. And it's easy to agree to that. Well, we have heard and we know that Putin's position, it is difficult. He has to tread very carefully so as not to step on the toes of the elite. The wave of opposition has subsided, but the grassroots causes of the protest have not been addressed. This is from a report from our Institute for Foreign Affairs by Arkady Moshes, that for the first time has evidenced the polls last year show that a majority of the population is putting the blame for the problems in the country on Putin personally. And actually in the same report, more or less the same words as were expressed by Grigory here. Grigory talked about the self-preservation strategy of the government. But in that report you can also see that the fear of losing everything upon departure seems to imply that Putin and the ruling elite will cling to the power at any price. And a part of this price seems to be deteriorating external relations, which have been so much in focus in the previous presentations. I think it's high time Russia gets institutional rules legitimizing the succession of the highest power in the country. The Russian people deserve it, and it is a vital interest for the international community as well. And my hope and my suggestion is that the European Parliament will initiate a European debate on this very important issue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Henrik. I have to say that trade and economic relations is a very broad item, as we've learned this afternoon. I'm sure we can come back to energy issues during the Q&A, and maybe a word about the pipelines also, because the pipelines are always something worth discussing, because the world is changing. Piped gas and liquefied natural gas have changed their roles, and we're actually moving towards a world where gas becomes a commodity with a worldwide price. We're not there yet, but we're moving to that, towards that. Last but not least, our speaker is Ms. Galina Mikhaleva. She has a doctorate in political science, but as I understood, she's a sociologist, and Ms. Mikhaleva has also prepared a slides, and although she will be speaking in Russian, so please take care of your earphones and switch on the right channel. The slides will be in English, which we thank you for.
Thank you very much. Уважаемые ведущие, уважаемые коллеги,
dear colleagues, panelists, dear participants, I think that it's very important that here in Finland there's such a large interest toward the Finnish neighbor, and it's very demonstrative that the people have stayed till the end, although the day has been very difficult and intensive. So I show you more pictures than words, and my colleagues have already said a lot of things that I wanted to say. What things, for instance? First of all, let's look back to the history 25 years back, and imagine what kind was the beginning when the relationship between Russia and the EU began. Back then, a barrel of oil was $8. What it is now? Over $100. That explains a lot. Then secondly, on the both parts, there were a lot of illusions. The European people were involved with themselves because they were constructing European Union, involving new countries, new members, and there was a list of criteria as far as Russia was concerned. Everybody believed Mr. Gorbachev first, who said that Europe is going to be from Vancouver to Vladivostok, and then Yeltsin, who swore that Russia is going to strengthen its democracy. And the imagination was, the picture was that we are going to introduce market, give money. Obviously I simplified a little bit, but that was the main message. And everything will work out itself. And the things will work themselves out, sort themselves out. And further on, the relationships were built according to the principle of distorted mirror. Each party saw what they wanted to see, not what was in reality. And on the basis of this, on the grounds of this distorted mirror, we entered into all kinds of agreements. First, my colleagues have mentioned already, in the first agreement we declared our common goals. It was based on even earlier agreements, the so-called Washington Consensus. I'm not going to go into it. And the formalization took place when the first partnership and cooperation agreement was bound. There were common goals and a prosperous, beautiful future of excellent relationship, like almost between spouses. But unfortunately, the life did its own choices. You know, each party in the next agreement declare its own goals, its own principles, and here, even on paper, we can see quite substantial differences. Because if the European Union, first of all, stipulated the common goals and creation of institutions, which is extremely important for the economy and for the trade relations, because if there's no trust, there's no institutions, working institutions, we're not going to get anywhere. Russia, in turn, from the very beginning, stipulated the fact that the most important thing is the development of the trade relations. The democracy principles were somewhere in the fine prints, and that was it. So the rhetorics was more and more away from reality, and as a result we are now today where we are, where in spite of the fact that our 4 common spaces have been set as a goal, and that was actually announced in 2003, in reality the relationships are getting worse and worse. in spite of all kinds of summits, EU-Russia. Russia prefers to construct its foreign policy bilaterally and enter into agreements with each separate European country separately. So the most important thing is that there is a very strong link, and we have been spoken about it all day, between the policy and the economy. But you can trade with anyone, because EU trades with China, for instance, and only liberals are talking about the fact that we must obey human rights and things like that. Nobody else is talking about it. I remember a conversation with one of the German entrepreneur when I asked him that in Russia there are huge risks, no rules. Anytime you can lose your property. Do you know what he told me? He said, this is a question of zeros. Either you give a bribe in 10,000, you add it zero, it's 100,000, and the question is solved. And the most important thing is super profit. So when a Western entrepreneur comes to Russia, he is forced to play by our rules. They must give bribes. They must enter into those interesting agreements. And the paradox is arguably that this is why Western business is interested in this principle of one window. You give only one bribe in the highest place and all your problems are solved. Although, of course, there's no 100% guarantee. And it's not an accident that right now Europe is so dependent on Russian gas and oil. Putin is speaking about Russia as about the energy superpower. And indeed, our budget is built on selling natural resources, which is a corny thing, but everybody knows about it. But here it's necessary to understand that why is it convenient for everybody. I always compare it to a oil rain. For example, oil is raining and one person had a bucket, somebody had a swimming pool, and somebody had a cup, but everybody had a spoon. So everybody got some kind of a profit, some kind of bettering of their own lives. So that's why it's being perceived as some kind of a norm. And we see what the trade balance looks like. I'm not going to spell out the numbers, you can see them all, but you should pay attention that the changes in the political situation in Russia and instability in Russia led to a substantial decrease in Western investments, although even here you have to understand that it must be projected and to the international crisis in 2008, but the fact remains that the investments are going down. And here we can see what the export and import look like. What we export, we can see that the vast majority, 75%, is energy resources and raw materials. Europe, though, exports machines, equipment, complicated instruments, measurement equipments, and it's also quite important to understand because we talk about pipes, about oil and gas, but we shouldn't forget that in Russia there's a lot of enterprises that manufacture cars, vehicles, food, and it brings a lot of profit because Russia is not such a large market as, for instance, China, but we have a lot of consumers, and because those consumers have money nowadays, it's very, very profitable. Another example, before I conclude my presentation. The peculiarity of Russian economy, it's not the link between the large business, the big business, and the government. But the best example is probably the name that you probably know. It's Roman Abramovich, who is the richest person in England, the owner of Chelsea, who belongs to so-called informal family, first to Yeltsin's and now to Putin's. But there's another peculiarity, that huge profits from these oil and gas explorations go to the budget, and then we are kind of sewing those things into parts. Means that we allocate a lot of money for a large project, and then the vast majority of that money is being stolen, basically disappears into thin air. It's like the Olympic constructions, and I will tell you about another example, because just recently we had an anniversary of Chernobyl, that Russia and Europe suffered a lot, and before that anniversary, our Rosatom, which is pretty much the same as Gazprom, but in the atomic industry, received from the government budget 20 billion rubles, which is $500,000 for what? $500 million, excuse me. You see, I'm getting confused a little bit. For what? For construction of nuclear power plant in Turkey, in seismically dangerous area. And the payback period is 60 years. And there's a lot of examples like this. So our economy is a large budget, place to feed, and those who can feed on it, they just do it right away. So in these circumstances, to build equal relationships with the countries where economy is based on the institutions and where the ownership right is untouchable, it's very, very complex. So on the both parts, there are all kinds of challenges in Europe and Russia. In Europe, it is, first of all, a financial crisis, and what we are talking about a lot, the disintegration, the Cyprus dilemma, and I can tell you, the economists know what connects Cyprus with Russia. A lot of Russian accounts in this offshore area, but not only individual accounts, not only oligarchs, but also accounts of government-owned companies which are located in Cyprus. That's why we helped Cyprus financially. And obviously this energy dependency on Russia, although we are looking for alternative sources and the possibility of using shale gas, I think that, first of all, it's not going to happen in the near future. Secondly, it's considerably more expensive than just buying oil. And thirdly, imagine that the problem is solved and Europe consumes energy from, say, cows. We have practice like that as well. But Russia is not going away. And if Russia won't be able to sell oil and gas to you, so the people are going to be poor, and they're going to come here. So one way or another, the problem is going to persist, and we are going to have to solve it. As far as Russia is concerned, these problems of migration, we have spoken about it already. Migration from the Asian regions, this is so-called nationalization of the elite, which is Putin carrying out when he banned large civil servants from having any kind of property abroad, and their families as well. So that is going to mean that, of course, those economic relations and bonds are going to erode. Those people are not going to be able to invest, and the corruption scandals that touch larger and larger part of Russian elites, and that is something to do with as well, to do about. And respectively, the challenges that we have in the EU and Russia, for that matter, they seem unsurmountable sometimes. It's a question of visas. I'm not even going to go in there because it's been mentioned here many times. The changes of Russia's foreign policy vector and the Russian economy, because even the beginning of this period that we're talking about of transformation, Russia was Europe-oriented. Now, openly in the foreign policy concept, we say that the priority is Eurasian Association and Shanghai Agreement, which means that Russia is oriented to those countries where human rights mean absolutely nothing. So we have to understand that. only the interest, only the financial interest, and nothing else. This is Russian internal policy, domestic policy, huge instability, policy risks, political risks, where the external challenge can dissolve the regime, and the EU own problems pertaining to in my opinion, EU expanded too fast and too soft conditions for new member countries. And in addition to that, you, dear friends, are going to respond to Turkey, to Serbia, and all these problems are going to complicate the matters even more concerning the relationships with Russia. And finally, as far as Russia is concerned, the consequences of the WTO session, because we have spoken about it already, our moderator has spoken about it, and I'm not going to go into it either. And in addition to that, European Union and Russia, and we are united by the challenges that we don't even completely comprehend, which are, the Islamic terrorism, unstable countries, challenges that pertain to the threat from the North Korea, and those problems we cannot, refrain from solving together. This is one of the, circuit buses that our relations could probably unite somehow, like back in the day, the arm escalation led to the changes in Europe and in the whole world, and to the collapse of the Soviet Union. In addition to all this, we depend on one another, especially in Finland. We understand that it's impossible to build another Chinese wall or a wall between Palestine and Israel. We are always going to be neighbors, and we are going to have to live together. And I believe that this challenge is the most important. It must be all the time in front of us, and this is the reason why we must strengthen our relationship, although it seems difficult today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Спасибо большое, Галина Mikhaleva. This is a good way to start to end the panel interventions. There is a strong element of interdependence. There's also an interesting thing which we can touch upon in the discussion, and that is the fact that Russia has always had great difficulties understanding and accepting the European Union, especially the Commission, understanding the rights and the power and the way the Commission works, and this explains partly the preference to dealing bilaterally with the EU, especially with the larger EU partners. But you cannot bypass the Commission, you cannot ignore the European Union. But there's one point where I disagree with you, and I have to say that very openly and very clearly. The Finnish industry does not involve itself in corruption. You do not have, as of late, many examples of corruption of major international corporations. Think about the American Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. If an American company is involved in corruption abroad, it finds itself in the dock. It will forfeit, first of all, the support of its own government, and it will face criminal procedures back home. And this is the same thing for a Finnish company. Think about Siemens. Siemens is a world-class corporation that almost was destroyed by corruption, which it practiced all over the world, including Russia. Corruption, what you are saying about corruption is understandable. You are actually talking about a mirror image, psychological mirror image conception. You know that corruption is the only way to do business in Russia for a Russian company. So you think that the foreigners have to do the same thing. But it just doesn't. That's not the fact. We would be destroyed. We would be blown out of water. Would we do that? So I just want to end on that note and say that corruption is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, problem of the Russian system. It's endemic. It's part of the system. But if you want to do business in Russia, as we want to do, and we do, and we've been doing it for years and decades, and we will continue doing that, we do not engage in corruption.
Очень короткое возражение. Если бы этих проблем не было, то не было.
There is no, there's no objections, and that's why there was a scandal in Germany. There was a scandal with IKEA, and the German companies were forced to withdraw. If there are such agreements, so there is a problem.
If you're involved in corruption, you pay dearly for that. I see hands rising, and I recognize the lady over there.
Thank you. Just a small commentary. I'm Olga Zhdaeva. I'm International Secretary of the YABLOKO Party. But I will make a commentary on your statement, on Galina's statement about corruption and about involvement of foreign companies into Russian corruption. I'm afraid I will just have to give you a very small fact of a very well-known company called Alcoa, one of the aluminium giants. You'll know that. And Alcoa is very much involved in Russian economy, and they have several enterprises in Russia. And I have a good friend, and she is pro-YABLOKOs, and Americans were asking her about elections in Russia, about election fraud, etc., etc., etc. And she explained everything quite honestly, that there were elections, that there was stuffing of ballots, and the next day, one of the VIPs from the company approached her and said, "Come on, if you continue talking so honestly about Russia, about Russian election, and if you ever say anything against the government, you'll be sacked." So, Alcoa pretends not to pay to the Russian government, but they suppress their staff in talking honestly about what has been happening, and they do not allow them to express their views. So my friend had to stop talking about that, and she never discusses politics again, because she wants to keep her place in Alcoa. So it's very normal.
It is not. Klaus Kleinfeld is the man who is the president and CEO of Alcoa. He used to be the president and CEO of Siemens. He was sacked because of the corruption scandals in Siemens. I'm sure we will see you in an American court as a witness. The next question, please. Over there. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Andrian Vlachov. I'm from European University at St. Petersburg, and I'm doing my PhD internship here in Helsinki. And just to get from the corruption, I've been studying the cooperation between Russia and Europe in the context of the Northern Dimension programs, Barents Sea Arctic region, and so on. And to my view, the main feature, and I would even say the key to success of those programs, is the close cross-border cooperation in borderland regions. Could you please explain what role does it play now, and what role will it play in the nearest future in the European and Russian relations? Yeah, thank you.
Matti, would you care to answer? Of course, the northern dimension is very much has a very natural regional element. But Matti knows the northern dimension from its inception. He was one of those people who wrote the first memos.
As I said, earlier, we have a rather practical, everyday, very wide cooperation with Russia, you know, with the government, with the civic society. And I think that's very much the basis of the cooperation in the European North, whether it's in the framework of the Northern Dimension or the Barents Cooperation or the Baltic Sea Cooperation. I think that's part of the kind of working agenda between European Union and Russia. And I think it has to be, because this is the area where the European Union and Russia, I mean, we are facing each other. Our border authorities on both sides, we have to, you know, every single day get the, you know, border traffic going. Our customs authorities, they have to do the same thing. Our aircraft, you know, all the, you know, the practical things we have to do every single day. And I think they make each other's ways of, you know, handling these things more kind of down to earth, and there's rather little politics. There's a lot of practical cooperation, and I think that's the reason why these things have been moving on.
First of all, to Olle, who wanted to come in on corruption, if I understood you right, and then I'll ask Henrik to come in.
Well, that's of course essential, but I thought I got a hint from you that you, in the beginning, that you meant that you could separate the economics, politics, and trade with the rest of the theme in this, and I tend to disagree. I don't think that's not the world we are living in. And therefore I think it has been mentioned all the time here that we have to have some sort of combination. I'm not saying that this is easy. It's, of course, very difficult. And Finland has its historic views, of course. But I do not think, and that is my worries, that sometimes we are fooled and we are a bit naive in the rest of Europe. My friends from the Baltic countries, they used to say to me when Europe is negotiating business, doing business with Russia and Moscow, you are always fooled. You never understand them. You say that Russia does not understand European Union and the European Commission. Who does that anyway? But what I do think that it's even more complicated for us to understand what's happening in Russia. And that is not only because of the language problem. That is a culture problem. And I think we have to reflect over this. And I do think that, and my Baltic my friends, they are saying, you have to be harsh to the harsh guys. And in my view, the guys in Moscow, they are harsh. They are tough guys. And perhaps we should be a bit tougher. Could that be the result of this seminar? That perhaps we should step out there first, not shouting, of course not listening, of course we should listen, but actually have a dialogue on the same basis. I don't think we have that today. I think actually that some from Moscow is shouting at us, do this, do that. So that's why I'm trying to, try to combine it, but that's very liberal. You lean on this side and you lean on that side.
I'm sure you have a point. Henrik.
A little comment on the northern dimension. It could be a very useful instrument, and it's underexploited, clearly. Some very good projects have been carried out, like the wastewater treatment say in St. Petersburg, and a lot of interesting healthcare projects too. But there is a lot more to do. I would say there are two problems to get this really going. One, which I experienced during my time in the European Parliament, was that many of my colleagues thought that, hey, this is your Finnish thing together with the Russians. What's in it for us? So it's been difficult to mobilize the enthusiasm for it, which it deserves on the EU side. On the Russian side, and that goes also to a certain extent for the European Union, that is that Russia, first and foremost, the political goals, they are defined on a very high level. you were talking about cross-border operation, and that's great. Unfortunately, it's fading away now. But it's very difficult to get a political commitment and clear goals. I do hope, on one side, that the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region, on one side, and the Russian strategy for the northwestern parts of Russia would, so to say, distill goals and projects that they would serve as instruments in finding common goals. I was very happy to hear what Carl Haglund said this morning, that this has been working out now in the Baltic Sea region around in the environmental questions. And I think that the environmental questions in one way are good, because there we don't speak about human rights, which Kremlin doesn't like.
Yes, Anttonen from the Finnish Parliament. My question concerns Russia's membership in the World Trade Organization. As we've understood, some new problems have turned up in Russia's relation to WTO, that Russia has had problems in fulfilling its commitments in the WTO, or some of its own regulations are in contradiction with the regulations of the World Trade Organization. What do you think? What kind of conclusions should be made on this issue? And do you think that these violations or shortcomings are serious in nature? And are there some concrete ways of maybe solving these problems? And my question is mainly targeted to Matti, Anttonen, and maybe René Nyberg, who are leading specialists on this issue.
Did you ever think that Russia would be an easy member in the WTO? It is as difficult, or at least as difficult as China. Matti?
I think these problems which have arisen, they are serious. Especially, this scrapping utilization fee for cars, as European Union is a major exporter of cars. And these utilization fees were introduced as a compensation for the lower tariffs, and that was said very openly by the Russian authorities. So I think there's a breach of that agreement we made with Russia, and I think that is going to be a very important topic between the European Commission and Russia, both sides hopefully finding a compromise or acceptable solution. Then for Finland we have some smaller questions concerning import duties of pulp and paper, certain qualities, and then import licensing system of coniferous wood. On the other hand, I think we have to accept that Russia has fulfilled most of its commitments which it made when coming into WTO. So we are not talking about that all commitments are not fulfilled. We are talking about rather limited number of them. Some of them are important, as I said, the car utilization fee, and then some which are important for some member countries like Finland, Sweden and Latvia, for example, concerning these import duties of wood. So I think this is the case, the situation at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I recognize? Yes, please. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Björn Bundström, a political science student here at Helsinki University once again. My question may be mainly for Olle. Many here have talked about the lack of a common foreign policy in the EU, at least yet. But I think Galina is the first to mention one of the core problems is that Russia prefers the bilateral agreements with individual EU countries. Why is the EU allowing their member states to do so this much? Why are we not focusing more on the common agreement?
Olle, discipline.
Ordnung muss sein.
Genau.
Well, this is of course extremely complicated, but I think the situation is improving actually. But I would say that Russia is of course using this as a sort of bypassing some other weak countries and the European Commission. So it's improving. And Catherine Ashton, as trying to serve as the quote-unquote foreign minister of Europe, is, of course, she has a difficult task, and probably she will be replaced by two persons next year. And it's like Henrik Kissinger said, whom am I going to call when I'm called Europe? I'm not sure that either the Russians nor the Americans actually know who's they're going to call. Perhaps, I think, at the current state of play, I think they call Bundeskanzler Merkel in Berlin. And that is perhaps the right decision at the current state of play. But it's going. And I would say it's going in the right direction. But I would say that if you listen to the foreign minister in France, in Germany, in Britain, they actually don't want a common foreign policy, because they know that deep down in the bottom there are some certain national responsibilities that they will, at least according to me, never leave to the European Union. You can see it in the Syrian case now. If the European Union is trying to block, still lifting the embargo, Paris and London, together with Washington, will do whatever they want anyway.
Thank you. Before I give to Henrik, just a small observation. I mean, there are areas where the members of the European Union have no say, and that is, of course, energy policy and trade policy, and also competition policy. I mean, there's no way to bypass the commissioner on competition issues. So, well, there are very few possibilities, but there are very few possibilities. Mario Monti and his successors were tough guys and are tough ladies. There's no question about that. Energy policy, look at the third energy package. I mean, it's not anymore something where you can ignore. Of course, the member states have a say. They always have a say. And if you're bigger, you're bigger. Henrik.
Well, actually, you both said most of what I thought, but your question relates to the expectations we have on the Union. And we must remember that the European Union is a work in progress, far from completed. And this is very clear on this, in this foreign policy sector.
Gentleman over here.
Olle Kehkonen, Nordea. I just dare to raise my voice because one of the speakers was saying that he did not like banks. But during the break,
they like good bags.
Well, he mentioned that he likes bankers, but not the banks. Nevertheless, what would be your message to financial industry in this trade relation between the Russia and EU, especially when it comes to money transfers, money laundering, AML, know your client, etc.?
Before I ask Matti to comment, because there was a question about the foreign banks withdrawing their operations or closing in Moscow. The German debate is very simple. They don't like bankers, but they like bankiers.
Thank you. I'm not in the business of advising companies or banks doing anything, neither withdrawing or going into the Russian market, because I'm not an investment banker. I think the normal prudency is important there. I think some Western banks have quitted the Russian market, not because Russia is small, but because the banking market is quite difficult for foreigners. You have the big state banks, which have a huge advantage of having a very wide network all over the country. And then you have the Russian private banks who have the advantage of knowing the market quite well. And then you have the foreign banks who come as outsiders. They don't have neither of these advantages. Of course, the foreign banks have an advantage of having usually a bit cheaper financing, because they can use their mother banks in, for example, in the European Union. So, but it's a rather unequal playground for for financial institutions, and I think that's the reason many foreign companies, foreign banks have left Russia, but there are still a fair number left, and I think some of them quite successful. So I think it's a increasingly competitive market, I hope, but I think the role of the major state banks is kind of distorting the competition situation quite clearly.
The banking sector has changed dramatically, and in many ways Russia has caught up with the modern world on this. The role of the two government-owned Sberbank and VTB is of course stoking very much. But just as a point of information, which many Finns don't know, is that I think by size the 15th bank in a commercial bank, privately owned commercial bank in Russia, Uralsib Bank, is the CEO and president is a Finn, Ilkka Seppovich Salonen, as he is known in Russia. He used to work for Nordea, before that for Merita, and then later was a vice president of Sberbank. The Russian banking sector is one of the parts of the Russian economy that it has caught up with modernity, and that's very good news. If what concerns the foreign banker player, it's a question of competition and the market conditions, which are not easy. Now, yes, please, the lady over there from Holland.
Yes, Cecilia van Pesky, the Netherlands, D66. It was mentioned by several speakers today that international trade between our countries and Russia is so important. The Netherlands and Russia are each other's, not number one, but we are amongst each other's top trading partners. And the Netherlands is not a Nordic country, I know, but we see ourselves as quite Nordic. And 2013 is our year, our big jubilee year with Russia. So it's the Netherlands-Russia year, with many, many different activities. President Putin came to visit the Netherlands a week or 2 weeks ago, where Amsterdam was full of rainbow flags. Quite shocking for the president, I think. But I think my question is, since you have the expertise in economics, in trade, do you see these types of thematic years, a Netherlands-Russia year, a Finland-Russia year, and also all these trade, like these special trade travels towards to a country where you have business people coming together to a country, do you see them as highly valuable, highly supporting and boosting trade between our countries, or do you think we're just putting a lot of energy in organizing such a year as we are doing in the Netherlands at the moment, and it's more just trying to sell the idea, but it doesn't really wind up to anything? As of tomorrow, I will have a new king, so if I ever get to meet him, I would like to inform him about what you are saying about this topic as well. Long live the Queen. Huh?
Long live the Queen. Thank you very much. Olle, are you preparing for a Swedish-Russian jubilee year? And Matti, do we have already a year which has been slated for this kind of thing?
Congratulations to your new king. Long live the king. I can say that as a Swede as well. It's probably safest that way. Well, yes, and convenient. You have to be re-elected. Remember that. Ambassadors does not have to do that. Well, of course, I think we will have that, especially concerning the field of culture and the field of understanding. And you can have, of course, you can mix it up with trade, economics. Of course, we always do that. And in Sweden, we bring in the forefront the king or the crown princess. And that is opening doors, of course. For a liberal, it could be, well, it's perhaps not only convenient, a bit strange, but that's the way business is done. But I do think that we should always, and I say that always, when we are doing this kind of business, also have a reflect of the situation in more general sense in the countries. Otherwise, I don't think we should have this kind of meetings.
It has to be reflected. And I have no problems that we are reflecting how the countries in Europe is doing. No problems at all. But we should always have it. In China has been mentioned here, and I think you were indicating that we were showing some double standard. I can agree on that, of course. But when I was in China, the delegation, we were about 10 people. One of us at every meeting, we raised the issue about human rights. And they answered in a perfect way. They knew what they answered. They were educated in Oxford or Harvard. But we raised the issue. Perhaps, and I can understand that, Mr. Ambassador, it was, of course, a reflection on my conscience. I can agree on that. It was a bit double standard from my point of view as well. But what are we supposed to do? And that is why my conclusion. Words is there, and we need those words.
Just to calm you down, Olle, I'm a member of the Russian NGO board. I'm a member of the Moscow Political School of Studies of Yelena Nemirovskaya. So I kind of know what I'm talking about also. Matti, please.
I think, when we start to think about the role of the governments in dealing with Russian, I think it's first of all good to remember that the Russian economy is slowing down quite markedly at the moment. It has something to do with the oil prices. The oil prices are not going up. They are more or less stable, and the Russian economy, in order to grow, needs growing and growing oil prices. Then in Finland, I think we have Russia here in our picture every day. We don't need a Russia year to remind that Russians are next door neighbors. Next week we will have tens of thousands of Russians who will come here to celebrate their holiday over the Victory Day. In first week of January, we have more than 100,000 Russians every day in Finland. So we know that the neighbor is there. So we don't need a special year to remind us of that. And I think that's a good thing that the relationship has normalized in this way. I think one challenge for Russia is the role of state in the economy, which has grown in the last years, and of course that speaks more for this kind of a government assisted export promotion. But I don't know how long term this trend, how long this trend will continue, because the moment Russia becomes more a market-driven economy and the role of state decreases, I think then maybe we don't need so much government-assisted export promotion in Russia too. Thank you.
There's no question about that. State visits are important, and the instrument of royalty or a president's entourage makes. It's not that important in all countries, but it surely is important in a country like Russia. It has a significance because you talk to the leadership, and you have to talk to the leadership. I'll pass the microphone to Galina.
I think that the more contacts on different levels, the better. And I believe that's what has been lacking in the relationship between the EU and Russia is the consistent, systematic development of cooperation with the representatives of the civil society. There are some elements, but they are just elements. And if we look back in the history, we would see that the practice of changes of post-totalitarian country is there. It's Germany and the role of the Allies that played a very serious role and had a very important functions and influence and consistent programs of involvements of people like school exchange, student exchange, educational system, and interaction on all kinds of levels. Another area that we haven't even touched upon is partnership of cities. It started and then it somehow subsided. This interaction of municipalities, not as you said that tourists came here, had a good time, bought something and went back, but consistent, permanent contacts and multi-level communication that can gradually change Russian society, and the Russian society from the bottom up will impose pressure to the elites to change the relations between Russia and the EU.
Is looking intensely at us, and I realize that my friend Nikke Turvals is in the audience. He will now summarize. He just arrived, and he will now summarize the day for us. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry about spoiling your fun. Thank you for an extremely interesting discussion. Thank you all for being straight and talking straight. Thank you, René, for being a great and also straight moderator.